I'm living in a very rural, small village, with maybe about 10 to 15 houses at most. It's very close to a highway, you can drive there within maybe 5 minutes. It's about 10 minutes away from the actual town itself. If you cross the street, it takes just about a 10-minute walk to reach the forest. On Christmas Day, it was my first Christmas in this area. It was sometime in the afternoon when my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 1700 hours and already dark when we left. We had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road toward the forest and then turn right, following a small gravel cycle track close to the forest border. This track eventually connects our village and the next, which is maybe about 15 to 20 minutes away. In the middle part of that track, you must walk through a small bit of forest. It is rather dark, and the trees are extremely tall and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as a bit odd, since cars are not allowed to drive there, and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside the car, and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parked there for quite some time. In front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me there was someone standing behind us in the middle of the road. Nobody had been following us the entire way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally as well, because at this time of night, you can never be too careful, especially with all the wild boars around. It is also mating season, so they are more aggressive than usual. Indeed, when I turned around, there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first, I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone is just taking photos of your car. It was not even legal to drive on that path with a car anyway. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining that I was just taking photos of the tree. He did not react and still just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that it was not necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure that there was a normal explanation for his behavior, maybe. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just get out of there and follow the path leading to the next village. It was probably only about 7 more minutes until we reached it. I remembered the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and Googled it. It turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in an extremely strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around, and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again, turned the lights off, and did not leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer route than initially intended, as I did not want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way, and my phone battery was low, so I did not want to have to call the police back then. But I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details about that guy. My big regret is that I did not memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously did not think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as strange when I thought about the frozen windows, and that he could possibly have been there for quite a while. And somehow, he was walking behind us without anyone noticing for quite some time. He did seem to be sneaking up on us as well. I think I was incredibly lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I do not want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. When I told my housemate, she theorized that he may have been spying on the houses awfully close to the forest border, as you can easily investigate their backyards without being seen. I think that is probably likely. I had the thought of photographing the car when I entered the forest part of the path, but somehow I felt just weird about that. I thought it would probably be a bit weird and disrespectful. In hindsight, I believe this saved me, as he must have been hidden behind the trees close to the car. If he was really planning on burglary or worse, dumping a body, I think it's likely he may have attacked me if he realized I had a potential photo of his car with a recognizable license plate. It was Christmas, 2008, and I had awoken to a bright, sunny Southern California day, excited, full of energy, and full of emotions, prepared to head toward LAX so I could board my plane and fly across the country. That year, I was heading toward West Virginia to spend the holidays with friends and family. We would stay up every night watching movies, playing video games, and telling stories. During my vacation there, I did many fun and exciting things, including going ice skating, camping, and even feeding some deer in my friend's backyard. But I'm pretty sure you're not really interested in all that, fair enough. Let's focus on the events leading up to my scary encounter, including the experience itself. Now, the reason I chose to fly on Christmas Day was that it was way cheaper, which, fun fact, if you travel during the season, choose the 25th. Most families want to already be together on Christmas Day, which is why airlines lower costs for customers on the holiday. Just an FYI. Anyways, I boarded my American Airlines flight at approximately 9 in the morning, and we took off close to around 9:45. The flight itself was boring, consisting of listening to audiobooks and having small conversations with a friendly woman who sat behind me. Fast forward to a little past 7 p.m., you must remember, there is a 3-hour time difference between the East and West Coast. We arrived at the airport on schedule. It had been snowing that evening, so I bundled up in extra layers, with my comfortable boots softening each of my steps. Once I grabbed my luggage, consisting of my carry-on and small suitcase, I headed toward the shuttle system just outside the airport, which was to take me roughly an hour to the small town where my friend lives and drop me off at her mom and dad's bakery. We had planned it this way because my friend, who in this story we will refer to as Amanda, and her dad would be at the bakery working on some sweets for all of us to enjoy back at her house. Don't get me wrong, they did offer to pick me up at the airport, and they insisted heavily that it was not an issue, but I insisted further that I would take a shuttle to them. So I did, and about an hour later, I was dropped off at my friend's bakery and greeted by Amanda. "Where's your dad? Is it just you?" I asked Amanda as she helped me get the snow-covered suitcase and carry-on into the back room. "Oh, he'll be right back. He went to get some things from home." We proceeded to settle down inside the back room and talked for about 15 minutes or so, catching up and me telling her about my flight. Bear in mind, the lights in front of the bakery, where all the sweets are, including the cash register and displays, were off, and the "We are open" sign was set to closed. So anyways, as we were talking and enjoying some cookies and milk, we suddenly heard a loud thud and shattering coming from the main lobby. Amanda and I quickly jumped out of our seats and then stormed through the kitchen door, only to be met with one of the worst sights you could possibly imagine. Two hunky, large figures with black ski masks covering their faces, black sweaters, matching pants, gloves, and boots were now in the bakery and were armed. One had a crowbar, and the other had a handgun. I remember everything in slow motion, my life passing before my very eyes as the men told us to be quiet and to show them where the money was located, otherwise we would be in a world of trouble. Amanda told the men the cash register was empty, but the money was in the back room and placed inside a box. The men approached Amanda and me, and we were briefly headed into the back room, with Amanda pointing at said money box placed on a table. While the men had their backs turned toward us, we took this opportunity to book it out of the bakery, jumping through the shattered front window and running across the street to a small shopping center. Naturally, everything was closed. It was Christmas, after all, so the overall feeling of being isolated without anyone nearby for help as it snowed in the darkness was a very real and very scary feeling. Amanda and I both hid behind a large dumpster, keeping a watchful eye on the shop as Amanda called her dad to warn him about the two armed men. Her dad asked us if we were safe. We assured him that we were fine and hidden behind a dumpster on the other side of the street. Amanda's dad then advised us to call the police. He then said he would be there in about 5 minutes with a shotgun. Too bad he did not get there in time, nor did the police, because almost as soon as we were on the line with 911, the two men came racing out of the bakery with the money box I mentioned and ran in the complete opposite direction into an alleyway. 20 seconds later, a black minivan, which we assumed housed the two robbers, stormed down the street and disappeared into the cold, dark West Virginia night. Sadly for Amanda and her family, they ended up losing a few $1,000s that evening, having to cover costs for the damages and the money stolen. But when all was said and done, they were just so thankful nothing bad happened to either me or their daughter. Nothing was stolen from my belongings, which I was thankful for, as I had all their gifts wrapped neatly in my suitcase. Now, even though we stayed at the bakery longer than expected, talking with the police and filing a police report, we eventually returned to Amanda's house at roughly 2 in the morning to open presents and try to get our minds off of what was truly one of the most frightening experiences of our lives. The police never did catch the men, but in what was perhaps one of the greatest acts of kindness, the townsfolk came together to help raise the funds for Amanda's family to cover the losses from that cold and scary Christmas evening. I live in a small town in northern Illinois, and my dad and his friends decided to go camping. He asked me if I wanted to come along. Not wanting to be out alone for a prolonged period of time, I agreed. We drove about 2 hours into Wisconsin, to some property we own up there. It was about 4 p.m. when we arrived, and we just started setting up. We finished around 6 p.m. After that, we hung around the campfire, telling stories, playing games, and making s'mores until about 12 a.m. At that point, most of us headed off to bed. As soon as I laid down, I realized I had to use the bathroom, so I told my dad where I was going, and he ironically said, "Don't let the Sasquatch get you." Obviously, I did not take him seriously, because I thought he was joking. I'm somewhat skeptical about cryptids in general, and I like to think that we need a little bit more tangible evidence before going head over heels into something. I grabbed a headlamp and walked about a minute or two down a steep hill and dug a hole. I was about to go, but then I heard a branch snap about 30 yards away. I immediately perked up and looked around. I could not see anything past the 10 feet that the headlamp illuminated. I said, "Who's there?" or something along those lines, at which point I heard heavy pounding and more twigs snapping, except this time they were closing in on me. I panicked and started going back up the hill. I turned around to get one last look, and no more than 10 feet away was this thing. I say thing because, though I think it was a Sasquatch, I have no experience with cryptids. Anyways, this thing was at least 7 feet tall with brown hair all over its body. Its face, will always be imprinted in my nightmares. Its eyes were almost glowing, and its mouth was wide open, exposing vaguely human-like teeth, except they were serrated. After seeing this, I bolted, not caring what was in front of me at that point. I did not look back once until I was at my campsite. I panted as I was out of breath and turned back to see the glowing eyes at the bottom of the hill staring back. I practically leaped into my tent and laid there for what felt like an hour, just listening. After I did not hear anything, I eventually dozed off until the morning and told my dad what happened. He burst out laughing. Frustrated, I never brought it up again. This story occurred last October and was my encounter with one of Texas's oldest unsolved mysteries, the Marfa Lights. It may not be as terrifying as some of the other stories submitted here, but it was a unique experience for me. On some nights, as you look across the West Texan desert outside the town of Marfa, you see strange orbs of red, white, or yellow light floating above the desert floor. You may see only one or two, or sometimes several in the air at one time. Sometimes they hover perfectly still, before blinking out, or they move, even shooting across the night sky. They are unpredictable. Stories of sightings of the lights go well back into the 1800s. There are even Native American legends about the mysterious lights. Many researchers have run studies to try to determine their cause. The leading theory is that unique atmospheric conditions cause headlights from cars to be reflected in the sky, but a lot of people don't buy that. While on a trip with some friends from a university out west to experience the beauty of the Chihuahuan Desert, we decided to visit the viewing area about 10 miles outside of the small town of Marfa. At the time we were staying there, one of my favorite hobbies was going bird watching, so I brought my big spotting scope on the trip, which I planned to use to see the lights better. We arrived about half an hour after sunset. If you have never been far into the desert, it gets dark, and I mean dark. The only source of light was the dim lights on the steps of the viewing area, the stars, and a single cell tower in the distance. I set up my scope and sighted it in on the cell tower. We did not have to wait long before a small white light appeared on the horizon. It moved slowly across the horizon before blinking out. Then another one appeared, and another. Sometimes they would go out after a minute, other times they would be visible for about 5 or more minutes. Whenever I would focus my scope on one, I was never able to see any discernible features other than a small blip of light. Another strange thing to note was that whenever I cranked the zoom on my scope, the lights never seemed any larger than when looking at them with the naked eye. We stayed for about an hour, and I was absolutely entranced by the little lights. As luck would have it, that was not the only time we would see them on that trip. A couple of days later, we were returning from a hike in Big Bend. It was a long drive back, if I recall, so it was pretty dark by the time we were getting back to Marfa. Driving through the desert at night is surreal. You can go hundreds of miles and hardly see anything. It is like the whole world drops out of existence, beyond the reach of the headlights. When we passed the viewing platform, we saw about half a dozen white, red, and yellow lights way out in the desert, the most we had ever seen at once. Where it got weird was when I turned around in my seat and saw a little reddish light behind us. There was only one, though, so I did not think much of it. For my best guess, I would say it was about a half-mile behind us, maybe 25 to 50 feet off the ground. I thought it could have been a motorcycle, but then it started moving perpendicular to the straight road we were on. It followed us for about 10 minutes, if I had to guess, and from what I could tell, it kept the same distance between us and itself before suddenly just disappearing into thin air. We all said stuff along the lines of, "Well, that was weird." None of us had ever seen anything like it, and 2 of the people in the car had been out there multiple times and had seen the lights many times themselves, but never anything like that. We did not feel threatened by it, but it was a cool experience that many people probably have not had. If any of y'all are in West Texas, be sure to stop by Marfa and see if you can catch a glimpse of these weird lights. People have speculated that these things could be ghosts, aliens, car lights, or even electricity caused by the rocks under the area, but I really hope that the mystery of the Marfa lights is never solved. We need a few more mysteries in the world,